So today is on the fundamental, mainly main method, you could say, or classical method of ethnographic research. We are going to be looking at three things: how to do participant observation as the main method of ethnography, how to write the information we gather from doing participant observation, and what are its applications and approaches of doing our participant observation in different contexts, in different scenarios, in different industries, possibly within academia and outside of academia. Mainly, we'll be focusing on the doing part, so you guys can get a kind of basis knowledge of what it is about, and then you will practice it and use it, and then you'll really come to learn what it means to do it. So, to help with this explaining, I will be referring a lot to my own research. I will be bullying Avi to say things at times, and I'll be hoping you guys will interrupt and ask many questions. This is mainly an introductory lecture, and I must apologize, I use a lot of notes, so you may see me picking up pads and looking like that. Don't be worried. This is an introductory lecture, and I'll be giving an overview of participant observation. So if you've done this before, or you've done, say, anthropology, or studied this method before, some of this might be repetitive, but I hope to give an impression to you mainly on this main methodology of participant observation. So, it's often considered the main method, as I said before. However, how is it actually done? Writing about it, and how is it applied very so much? What I want you to take home is how to do participant observation research, and there's no one way of doing it. It is incredibly personal, it is incredibly dynamic, and it incredibly depends on the context and what you're researching. So, a bit of housekeeping. Participant observation is a method. Just like interviewing or conducting surveys, it's a way of capturing some sort of information or data that social scientists use in vague terms. It vitally belongs to the wider science of ethnography, but it's a way of observing and participating in the activities to understand a certain people or social culture. Where participant observation is a method, and this is very important, participant observation is a method, ethnography is a scientific description of the social phenomenon, or culture, or beliefs, and so on. So, there's a very important distinction. This is an ethnography, a written, finalized piece of research. Participant observation is a method you use to create an ethnography. So I'm going to pass these around. Here we have 4 different ethnographies. I got to apologize. I grabbed these from the library, and the library has a bad tendency not to buy new books. So a lot of these are either classics or from the 90s prior. So they're not really capturing what modern or contemporary ethnographies are. So if you'd like to pass these along, have a wee look at them. We got on Irish Travellers, Gangs in Cape Town, Madagascar, David Graeber's book, and the Azandi, quite a classic by Evans Pritchard that looks like witchcraft and magic. So if you want to pass these around. So you can see, for example, you could write an ethnography on magic and ritual of the Azandi, an ethnic group. You could write an ethnography on gangs in Cape Town. You can do an ethnography on a particular place. You can do an ethnography of particular people, Irish Travellers. You can do an ethnography on a social phenomenon. For example, Thai berry pickers in Finland. So you'd be looking at maybe economic migrants, a particular social phenomenon you're looking at, rather than say a people or place or whatever. It's so broad, it's open and dynamic. It depends on what you're looking at. Some people even look at, say, a particular mushroom. And what is the social dynamics around a particular mushroom? What its economics are, who are the people involved in picking it, processing it, everything, and what are its histories and stuff. That would be an ethnography of a particular thing. So it's very dynamic and very varied. But participant observation, what we're covering today, is a method that you use to create an ethnography. So, for an example, my own PhD fieldwork. I did fieldwork on the state in Kenya, and I did an ethnography in a refugee camp on the state. on the Kenyan government. What you could do in ethnography, now in my current research, I'm doing an ethnography of older East Africans in Finland. So you can see that it can be quite dynamic. Yeah, Avi, you'd have
What is the difference between field work and participant observation?
Get to that. Field work is the time you spend in a field site. Participant observation is a method. To kind of quickly summarize. So we're getting into the meat or the basis of the lecture. What is doing participant observation? So participant observation is weird. You're going to be weird. In contrast to so many other scientific approaches, participant observation actually makes you talk and actively become involved in people's lives you do research with. There are many so-called various methods out there, such as doing surveys, doing an interview, as such that people use for their data gathering and research. This is all fine. But participant observation is quite awkward and unique. It's quite different because it actually makes you become involved in people's daily lives and their daily activities. While doing participant observation, you get to take part in your informant's lives. As a researcher, you should get involved in their daily, mundane activities and rituals. Doing so involves building trust and strong relations with people for your informants over long periods of time, normally in, like Avi pointed out, a field site or a place you do this research in. By attending events, special events, activities of a group of people, society, and organization, it's a means of learning the explicit aspects of their life. So I've got a list here of what it kind of means to do participant observation. The further we get down, the kind of further away we get away from maybe explicitly what participant observation is. It starts to clink into other aspects, but all of this feeds into what we mean by participant observation. And I'm coming back to this slide later to kind of analyze it. But we're going through one at a time, and I'll explain in more detail. So participant observation is about doing things and observing and interacting with people, objects, whatever, in the everyday, the mundane, doing things with people. By living in a community, for example, you could do this, taking part in usual and daily activities. You want to see and engage in the very mundane, very boring, day-to-day activities that people do, to understand what daily life is. This is revealing and seeing into people's lives, where they work, what they eat, what they do for recreation, and understanding eventually their economic situation, social, cultural context in which they're anchored to. For example, when you came to university for the first time, I know in my own experience, when I came to university, I was a bit perplexed how it all worked. It was very different from my schooling, which was very rigid. You had to do these things at certain times, where of course that depends on context. But when I came to university, I was like, I have to follow emails, I have to do this. I was often asking my friends, how does that work? Asking a lecturer, how does this work? Doing things, going to lectures and turning up in time, and then realize I have to write these essays, I have to do it in my own time, and I have to read these things. And the more I put in, the more I get out of it. And we all learn this while we do university. And at the end of your university, you're very good at university. You remember, you know how everything works. But at the very beginning of university, you're kind of lost, I imagine. I was anyway. So in our own lives, we do participant observation every day. We are participant observers. That's how we learn in life. But suddenly, when we are do this in a scientific way, we suddenly go, well, I'm just doing what I have always done in daily life. I'm just doing a social thing that people do, but suddenly I'm observing it in a social scientific way and trying to capture things, write things down, and field notes and such. An example, so mundane and daily activities are really important to capturing that, doing the day-to-day things, and they're very revealing for other aspects we engage in. For example, during my PhD fieldwork, the refugee camp where I worked, there was food rationing centres and water rationing centres and medical centres where people would go and get these resources they need for daily life. Which was very interesting, was nearly all of it was very heavily controlled by the humanitarian agencies that worked there. However, kind of an anomaly was the water taps. And when I spent time with people in their local communities and stuff, I came to always realize that it was all the local mothers and women who lived in the local facility managed the water taps. Not humanitarian agencies, no men, it was all run by women and local women. This was not something the humanitarian agencies organized, it was something the refugees organized. And that was a very mundane daily activity, going and fetching water. But the taps are only on at certain times. So every household has to claim, I have this amount of people in my household, this amount of people. So I have this amount of jerry cans. Okay, you get that amount of time to fill up that many. I need this amount of time. And they negotiated, and they did this. Now this was very revealing, this very boring, mundane thing you did every day to fetch water. It revealed so much that there was an undercurrent within the refugee camp of women autonomy and agency, political agency and control over a very important resource in the camp. And that was just from looking at a very boring, mundane, day-to-day activity. Now, there's a lot more interesting things out there. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about this refugee camp? Like, which community, like, which ethnic group was this? These were refugees from a nearby country, like, which is next to Kenya,
So,
being a conflict?
yeah, so you had Somalis from South Sudan, you had Congolese, you had all over East Africa, and even you had very few anomalies, of course, in that you had Afghanis in the refugee camp who flew to Kenya because they could get there without a visa and apply for refugee status elsewhere. So this camp was a massive transnational hub for other people. Very small number, overwhelmingly East African, but it was very interesting that it was there. But the water taps were obviously down. There was like huge zones and blocks, and these zones and blocks would have to nominate people who's going to run the water tap and who's in charge of that, and then that would be negotiated at the water tap at the time.
So it was a very diverse refugee camp.
Yes, super diverse.
So, I have a question. So, participant observation is that you take part in the daily life of the community. So it means that you not just stand out, like stand somewhere else and just observe, but you actually do the thing that those people are doing in that sector.
I would personally say yes, you should. But there's scales. Some people, in some circumstances, you can only observe. You can't go and take part, say if you're observing Parliament. You can't actually physically take part. But you could stand up and observe elsewhere. Of course, there's varying degrees. You could, say if you lived in a remote village, you would live in the remote village with the people doing day-to-day activities of them. But if you're in a bustling city, people have their lives and they're busy and such, being involved in their lives takes a lot more negotiation and a lot more work, and they want to do things in their own time. So you have to appreciate people's boundaries and respect that, and it really depends. So on one level, yes, you can just observe, depends on the context, but then there's another level, a far end, where you could fully embrace and do everything like what the locals or other people do or the context you're studying. So there's a kind of medium, and for example, in my own research, I couldn't sleep in the camp. I did on a rare occasion, but it was illegal and it was risking the people that I would stay with. So I had to sleep outside the camp. So I had very little understanding of what it's like in the camp at night. I had very little understanding of the curfews, of the police checks, and all these other things going on. But I understood what was going on during the day. And that's a limitation of aspects of ethnography. It's not a perfect way of capturing every detail, but you always have to negotiate and try a certain amount of access. So it really depends on your project.
But if you can, you will, right?
I think you should, but it really depends. And it really depends on your access, and really depends on your participants and how they feel. Always make sure there's a building of trust there and gradually build it up. It really depends on context and how you feel as an individual and your positionality in that place.
And you weren't allowed to sleep in the camp because of safety
The
reasons?
Kenyan
or
rules was a curfew ban, only refugees allowed in the camp and police. That was the law. So, the next thing we'll move on is exceptional events. Now, these are very important. When you're doing field work, events, exciting changes to the mundane. So they could be a rite of passage, such as someone receiving in Finland, you have that example, say, when you have your little hat and you get the rose and you get the photograph. These kind of exceptional events show something about a culture or an aspect of a place. You could have political ceremonies or musical events, and you go to these, and sometimes they show something exciting, something that breaks the day-to-day that people use, and you get an insight into something. These events are very important for social scientists alike to get a window or snapshot into the social cultural context. They also help you write, say, a vignette, an idea of what the place is like. They reveal sometimes political tensions, economic disconnects. For example, when I was doing my PhD fieldwork, there was every year World Refugee Day. When I first arrived in Kenya, I just arrived on World Refugee Day and was being held in Nairobi. And that was quite normal. Always had held in the capital of Kenya, Nairobi. All the politicians would come around and they'd have a few refugee performers. Well, the next year, when I was still just there, they held it for the first time in Kakuma refugee camp where I was. And suddenly, there was a whole different dynamic. Who was the lead speaker was the local county governor, no longer someone from the presidential office. So you've seen a very different political dynamic in that camp by going to these special events and who's speaking and who's praising who. And when refugees did get up to speak, they always had to praise the Kenyan government and the UNHCR. And it was very, very tightly controlled and orchestrated. And it was totally sad for the humanitarian agencies to show to funders who were there to watch it and go, oh yes, the refugees are so happy, yeah, yeah, yeah. So these events can reveal something. They reveal something of what an image maybe someone wants to present, or political tensions, for example. But at the same time, while you do these mundane activities day to day of people, you start to find out actually a lot of people are quite pissed off with the conditions in the camp and are not happy where money is disappearing, there's corruption, there's issues going on. So this is the importance of going to mundane, day to day things and doing the exceptional, exciting things. Now, another one is creating rapport, or I like to call it hanging out with people. Hanging out or creating rapport is building trust with people, conversing with your informants, chatting about what's important to them. As opposed to, say, you do an interview where you might say, hey, I'd like to do an interview with you. Before you do that, you get to know the person. You build trust with them, you get them comfortable with them, you hang out with them, maybe you cook with them, you go on a walk with them. You build a little bit of a relationship with them. So when you're doing participant observation, it's very good to engage with your informants, get them to know you. Don't force things on them. Tell them, I'm doing this project. You have to. I'm doing this project. I'm interested in this topic. Can we spend some time together? I'm doing this method, participant observation. I'd like to spend time with you and get to know you. And if they have free time and open to it, get to know them, create a rapport. So, for example, when I was doing my PhD fieldwork, often you get invited to people's homes to cook lunch or whatever, and you just chat, and you might find out, oh, the price of this has gone up, blah, 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 this issue. We didn't get food rations this month, that's because they're corrupt. Last time I went to food ration place, they're giving us less. They're stealing from us. They're stealing the food rations. That police officer over there, he arrested me. And this is in the comfort of their own home. They can talk about this. But as soon as you go out to the public spaces, you don't hear these things. So by creating rapport, you find out a lot more things that people are comfortable and build trust of you to tell you these stories now. So by hanging out, spending time with people, people come to recognize you. No longer are you the weirdo sticking out. No longer are you the weirdo doing research and observing and participating in things. Suddenly you become a friend. Suddenly you become an acquaintance that they can start to chat to you just about daily stuff. And that can reveal a lot more than you just realize than just putting an interview down in front of someone and recording, go, hey, tell me about this, I have these questions I want to ask. And by creating rapport, building trust, you might actually find new questions, things you didn't get fully answered in just general chit-chat. So participant observation is a great way of grounding yourself and finding out what's important to you. Even if it's not your main method, even if it's not what you want to do, it's a great way to do preliminary research. Find out things that's important to people, and instead of, say, here's a survey I've designed, please fill it out. And someone feels like, no, this is important to me. No, this is what urgent in my life. But when you spend time with, say, older people, people in later life, and they have these issues, and then you go, oh my God, they have a lot of problems of getting access to certain health care. You go, okay, I'm going to add that to my survey and have additional information, they can fill that out. So participant observation, hanging out, allows you to find dynamics of maybe an individual's case, but it may also feed into larger structural issues that people in similar situations are going through.
I just want to emphasise something there. Like the first time I did my doctoral research, which was on sports hunting, if you just go and interview someone, they will tell you, I realised after a few interviews that it was pointless me interviewing people, because I could just go and look at what's on their website, because that is what people will tell you if they don't know you. So it's like, how should I put this? It's kind of pointless doing an interview unless the person who you're interviewing already has some understanding and some trust in what you're interviewing them about. Otherwise, they will just tell you the kind of, agreed line that everyone has chatted about in their meeting, and that they want people who are not them to believe about them. So it's just really important, basically, to get to know people. Otherwise, there was no point in talking to them anyway. Just go on the internet and find out what they want you to think.
I think that's a really good, sorry, yeah.
I also wanted to comment that in Ukraine, many ethnographers, they even bring drinks or some food to people, because otherwise, until you drink with them or until you get introduced to them in some informal way, they won't sometimes even talk to you, or they won't give the full information on theoretical material that you can record.
That is a really essential point. There's also very important cultural steps to building trust. It's not just about what you think is a good way of building trust, it's finding out what's important. So sharing food, drink with people in many aspects is very important. It's a way of you've somehow connected in that way. So you can't just interview someone out of the blue. You really need to find what's important to them to build that trust, and then you'll find out so much more for your interviews and your other methods that you may want to apply. So this is why I'm having on participant observations super handy.
Was there cases that when they heard that you're a researcher, they kind of refused to hang out with you?
You know what? It's really interesting, and I will discuss that a bit later, but that isn't a really important point. Somehow, being a white man in a refugee camp managed by mainly Kenyans and Kenyan staff, there's a lot of distrust towards the Kenyan staff. Suddenly you're a white man. There was a lot of illusion. Oh, he's from the UNHCR. He's doing resettlement interviews. People will be coming up to me, I want to tell you my story, I'll tell you. And that's a really important point. You have to really explicit. I'm not with the UN, I'm a researcher, and sometimes I go, oh, I don't want to talk to you. You're not going to get me anything. But a lot of others would be, I want to tell you what's happening here, what's really happening here. You have to understand the dynamics. So it really depended, and it really depends on context. So when I wanted to talk to Kenyan staff from the main refugee agency, they wanted nothing to do with me. You're a white researcher from Europe, you're just going to say critical things about us. You're just another colonizer. But I will get to that in a moment on positionality, but that's a really excellent question. Thank you.
There was a second point I just wanted to emphasise on what is salient to people, right? Because you brought that up. I might have a question. So I work on malaria. The entire malaria industry is based on the premise that malaria is the main problem. But if you go and talk to people who live mainly in malaria areas, that's not the main issue often that people will raise to you. It will be the living conditions that they're in. So as a researcher, one has to think about why you are interested in a certain topic, and is that actually relevant to where you're going? And why has that particular topic, why have you ended up emphasising that? Why has the Finnish academic research decided they fund that? But is that relevant to the people that you're going to talk to?
Because we're on that topic, I'm going to jump forward and go on to positionality, which you excellently pointed out. So yes, to carry on your point, or what I was talking about, or Avi has just said, your positionality and who you are and what your interests are impacts your research, impacts who you talk to. So my interests were politics, particularly Kenyan politics and its impact in the camp. I ended up studying the state, and I met people who were also interested in those things. So I didn't fully capture life in the camp. No way, how could I capture that? I was selective in what I was interested in. At the same time, how others perceived me or got to know me impacted what I researched. So to carry on what I was saying before, in Kenya, I was seen as a Mzungu, white man. A Mzungu, away with you. Your problem. But suddenly when Turkana County, where the refugee camp is, so with Kenyan government officials in the camp from the central government, no talking to me. But local county government were my best friends. Suddenly when I went to their offices, I was an Irishman. And this has to do with the social context. In Turkana, they were all educated for a long period by Irish priests. So for the first time, I was perceived as an Irishman rather than just a normal, any other white man. So suddenly, they're like, yeah, Guinness, Jameson's, yeah, all these aspects about Irish life, mainly drinking, they suddenly became my best friends and great informants. They were telling me things, talking openly about this, and suddenly a different kind of trust was there. While with the central government officials, who were mainly Kikuyu or from the coast of Kenya, no talking to me, no interest. You're just another white researcher that's going to be critical of us. We're not interested. I got 1 or 2 interviews with people who were a bit more warm and more welcoming, but they were very rare. While in the Turkana County government, totally different. So your positionality and your interests influence what you're going to research and impact that, and also where your funding is. So you also, when you're doing participant observation, this is a bit advanced. When you're doing participant observation, you have to be aware of these impacts and what they shape and what you selectively look at, observe, and record. So just be aware of that while you're doing it. Now we'll jump a bit back. Participant observation is done over an extended period of time, normally. So it's a great way of capturing life over an extended period of time. It's time consuming. It's a socially exhausting fieldwork method, but it's a great way of capturing what's important to people. So traditionally, say for a master's thesis, you may do 1 month or 3 months in a place or with a group or studying a social phenomenon. But traditionally, for a PhD thesis, you would do 12 months. And then later you might do shorter periods. So you do a year. And this is totally superficial, this time period. But it has really good reasonings, I'd argue. Because as Avi once told me, conservationists who would come to Cyprus where you did your field work would often do research in the summer months, right? It's very dry in the summer months. So they come away back to places like England, Finland, and they perceive Cyprus as a dry place. While in the summer months, what's it like, Avi?
You mean in the winter?
Winter, though.
Oh, in the spring it's like super green, much greener than most places.
So doing a year in a place, you start to understand a place for its full context, rather than just getting a snapshot and leaving. So it's really important for conservationists to see the lushness, but they don't have funding to go in the winter or spring months. They're teaching then.
I've got another example. So before I got a job in Finland, Stefan invited me to Finland during the summer. It's great. But obviously one needs 12 months to feel the whole cycle.
There you go, there's another point. If someone just did research in Finland in the summer, they'd have a very skewed view of the Finns. Oh, they're so happy. Another example from my own PhD fieldwork, by spending time over Christmas there, I thought I would just go to church, I'd see what a Christmas ceremony is like. And I'd been to churches before, and they were normally what churches are like, very religious, a lot of singing, a lot of prayers and stuff. But I went to a Christmas ceremony with a South Sudanese Nuer church, and I was like, oh, this is great, I'm going for Christmas with my friend. And it turned out to be incredibly political. The priest at the front was calling for revenge attacks on those who attacked us in Juba, and we need to retaliate, the Nuer, this ethnic group in South Sudan. And it was revealing, I didn't know about this. So by doing this long-term fieldwork, you come across these kind of unexpected things you didn't know could have been there. These nuggets of information that are hidden in hidden places. And these aspects of time and change are incredibly important to understand people's culture or society or social phenomenon over an extended period of time. It's really important to capture all of that.
I have a question and comment on this building trust and like long term when you're observing that during this long time you might be in quite close contact with your respondents, and might be like I know a few researchers who are in contact with their respondents for a few years already, and they still keep contact and do some sessions to record new material. And in such conditions, maybe it forms more than just like formal relationship, just as researcher and respondent. And do you think it's important to keep it kind of formal and be in the position of a researcher in this way, or also a little bit it might change if you know this person for a long time and you keep recording them and listen to their personal stories sometimes?
I think we're all human, and when we do research, we sometimes make very close and connecting bonds. There's cases of people getting married in their field sites and marrying someone. You are human at the end of the day, and you make intimate bonds with people. And in my own case, I have a very good friend, Lam. He's from South Sudan, and he's resettled to Canada. And next month, I'm going to go see him. And part of my ongoing current research as well is to follow up and see what resettlement is like in Canada. But also, he's one of my best friends. We chat nearly every day, back and forth, jokes about politics, whatever, going on in South Sudan. And you will become intimately connected. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes you are just a researcher in people's lives, and that's fine. But you are still human. You will make these bonds. And I think there's no right or wrong way of going about it. You're an individual too, with your own positionality and how you engage and make friends with people. So that's a really good question. But I don't think there's a single answer for it. I think it's up to you as a person.
Just to follow up on this, there was another faculty member here I was having this discussion with, where they were of the view that you should not imply that, you know, if you're especially researching vulnerable people, they might consider you as friend, as someone whom they can reach out to in need, and then that puts you in a tricky position, and then you would want to, you know, clarify that. But at the same time, there was another friend who was a researcher, and they had a sort of an approach which you just mentioned, where they were like, I take some important part of their lives to propagate my research. So in return, if I can be, you know, their support, their long-term friend, I'll be happy to do that. So they saw it more of as an exchange rather than, you know, keeping that boundary because you don't want any liabilities for yourself.
Yeah, it's really tricky, and you're always going to get in long-term fieldwork into messy situations. In my own research, I knew another researcher in the camp who never gave money. Someone asked for money, he says, no, never make that expectation to people. Me, I always gave money. And that made problems. That made problems with people's expectations of me to always hand out money. But in her case, I felt it was unfair in the conditions people were in and the really tricky situations they were in. And you had built up friendships and such. Moral grey ground. It's messy. And this is a messy research because it's human. It's social. We do this in our lives normally. We engage people's lives and we find out about people's lives in every day. So I think that will be covered more in a later lecture on the ethics of ethnographic research. But there's never, you know, they say do no harm is essentially the main one. Brilliant. What about expectations? What about this? And this is all something you have to work out and something you can discuss in your reports. What are the expectations of you, of your research and this? Or something you can think about. And you need to be reflective on these aspects and build upon them. And be able to consider the impact of this on your research. And this is what ethnographers usually do in the forward of the book. They talk about complications in field research, and they talk about these methodological issues, and they discuss them. And it's really important to discuss it, but not fall into a trap of writing your whole methodology on these issues. You're still there to capture something else out there. Does that help? I hope so. So another aspect, and I'll quickly cover this, is learning language and dialect. Language and dialect are really important to be able to capture different people's ontological views of the world or how they think and culturally orientate aspects. So, for example, I told you about the word Mzungu, white man, but I remember hanging out with a Somali family in the capital, Nairobi, and the young boy said, look at those Mzungus over there. And to me, I mean, first of all, they're not Mzungu. They were clear for me, they're Indian Kenyans. And he was calling them Mzungu. So this linguistic aspects is very dynamic and very important to understand different cultural understandings of language and dialect. It can really reveal more. Maybe for a master's project or building up, you may not be able to fully learn another language, or you come from that language, you'll be able to speak Finnish, you can capture those things. So when you're doing research in a group together, and if you do to speak to someone from another language, try and explain, if they say a particular word that has extra meaning, try and explain it to the others in their language, and you might be able to understand something from that person's point of view a bit more. So language is quite important when you do participant observation, understanding their perspective on the world from that. Again, this is a bit reiterating, building trust, a working relationship with our fieldwork informants. And I didn't emphasize this earlier when I was talking about rapport. Building trust, it's a great way of developing these long-term relationships, but you don't want to push your research agenda. When you're with people you're quite interested in, don't force them into interviews and don't make them do things they're uncomfortable with. When you're a researcher and you're building trust, always have this when you're doing participant observation, is you're there to build that over time. Spend time with people. Do it over an extended period. And through that, you will build trust and be able to ask your questions you're interested in. Don't force questions on the people they don't want to answer immediately. Let them come to you with these answers. So, for example, this is maybe touching on the ethics of building trust. When I started my current research project here in Finland, I met this gentleman, and we met in a cafe, and we went for coffee together. I was really excited to meet him. I was like, oh, yes, he's going to be a great informant. Telling him about my research, he's like, oh, that's interesting, blah, 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 blah. I'm not getting involved. Okay, but you were very interested. Yeah, it sounds great. And I was like, why? Why won't you get involved? Oh, yes, I'd done another project with another researcher from another university in Finland, and I didn't like what she published. You have to be in constant communication with your informants. You have to build that trust. Let them read what you write. Anonymize them. Make sure they feel comfortable with what you're producing. Of course, you have the right to have a critical edge and think outside the box about things. Anonymize them. Don't include them if they don't want to be in it. That is an important part of ethics and building trust with your informants. Treat them with respect. You don't know when you go out there, I'm from Helsinki University from sociology. You don't know the impact that will have if you mistreat people or don't build that trust of them. You don't know the impact that will do in the long term. We've covered positionality, and then we're moving more and further away from the groundwork of what participant observation is to other aspects of ethnography that are important to participant observation. One thing is giving back, and we've already touched about this of giving money and this aspect of how do we get to know people. So generally in ethnographic research, there's the idea of giving back to the people or organization you're working with. Giving back can be a ways on, obviously this depends on context, for how you become involved with or do something for the organization you're with. For example, if you want to do research in an organization or an NGO or some sort of project that's happening, you could work as a volunteer in that project. You can become involved in their work, and then you can get access to so much information and people, and that's a way of also giving back. You're doing something for them, while at the same time you get great access to their project. However, it's really imperative as a researcher to maintain the position as a researcher. Make sure everyone knows you're there to do research, but you're also volunteering, for example. However, giving back can have problems. For example, when I planned to do my research for my PhD, I thought, oh, I could teach in a local school. I could do some sort of volunteer work in the camp to kind of give back, do something, meet people through that. However, someone told me, don't do that. Don't do that initially. Arrive there and make sure everyone knows you're a researcher. And I'm so glad I did. As I mentioned earlier, people thought I was a UN agent for a long time. Now, if I was teaching, people would have thought I was a teacher, and they would presume my position was that of a teacher in the school, and they may have told me other aspects or told me about the teaching problems or whatever. So it's very important you let people know when you're doing participant observation who you are and what you're doing it for, so they have a full understanding of what you're about.
Can I add something in there? Back from that hunting research, when I was working with the main association, their elected president would constantly be pressuring me to be like, you're going to write good stuff about us, right? And I learned very quickly, never make, I mean, this is like a kind of point for life. Don't make promises, right, that you don't know. You don't know in your research where it's going to end up going, and like until you analyze and write it up. So I was always like, there's no promises. I'm a researcher. I'm just trying to understand. I find you fascinating. I find what you do fascinating, but I don't know what is going to be concluded from this. And we'll stay in a conversation throughout this process to see what happens. But yes, I might end up writing something very critical about you. It might not be personal to you, it might probably be anonymized, but exactly just being very clear that my job is a researcher, and most people don't know what a researcher is because they're not familiar. It's not like, you know, it's not like, I don't know, a train driver or I don't know what is a familiar job. So you have to kind of find a way to describe yourself and introduce yourself, and basically develop like an elevator pitch and a response to questions like that. Like, who is a researcher? Why are you doing this? What's the point of this? Everyone, I don't know, in many contexts, I get a lot of suspicion to start with, and then it eases off, and then you just appear again and again and again until the person's like, oh, they seem all right.
Did you tell them, like, when the president kind of pushed, did you say like, well, I might write something critical, and if you did, how did they respond? Like,
so it basically was to try and be like as honest as possible, but sometimes, obviously, you're in a human context. You want to like please the person because you want to keep doing research with them. So it's just like holding back that need to like almost slightly exaggerate. So in those contexts, I was just like, I would always frame it as, I'm going to try and tell multiple perspectives here. I'm also going to talk to the people that don't like you.
Yeah. So like diplomacy, you know?
Yeah.
Respect.
I'd be like, that's why you've got to talk to me. Because you know, if you don't talk to me, no one's going to present your side of the story.
It's also reminding me of a case when we were recording an old woman, like she was singing for us, and she thought that like we were recording with video and microphones, and we agreed on it, and she thought that we were actually reporters or journalists, and then she asked us so that we can like post this lullaby she was singing for us in TV so that her family could see that, and it was really like tough to tell her that we are not actually. Well, we told her, but she don't know what is research. She doesn't understand that we are not gonna post it in the way she might expect us to do that, and it happens sometimes that people expect you to make something like from what you recorded from them, that it might be a bigger impact than it does as if like in a research way.
Did you find a way of going around that? Were you able to find out her family and send the recording? Or?
We found her family. We actually communicated like with her family, and they were really sent them the materials, and they were really happy that we shared with them, because she was more than 90 years old, and it was last thing that was recorded from her. But yeah, on TV, it wasn't TV, but it's an archive of folk music of Ukraine, and in different platforms. So it's an open material, but maybe somebody will someday use it for another research, which might become more public.
That's also a way of giving back, is giving something. Like, she asked for it to go on TV, she didn't quite understand. She wants her family to see it. So if you can share it with her family, that's a way of giving back.
Yeah, it's like it's a heritage in a global way of like global heritage of Ukraine, but also it's a personal heritage of her family that she's singing. She was recorded, and it's something that can be in her family history for a long time.
Were you involved in like a ethnography project to capture this?
It was I was there just not a fixer, but like helping other ethnographers to work. I was writing some notes while they were making giving an interview, taking an interview. Yeah, and it was a different project on research on a specific region of Ukraine, like getting their heritage on musical, cultural, and embroidery and everything regarding this region, and they used it actually for some public videos later of introducing to this region.
That's amazing. That's great. Thanks for sharing. And we have an actual ethnographer in the room. So I'm going to lastly touch on, the last thing is to retain a distance. We've somewhat touched on this before. So in participant observation, you participate and observe as much as possible in the social situations in an attempt to document it. The idea of being there or in the field and actively taking part in interactions with your informants, you, the researcher, can come close to experiencing and understanding the so-called insider's point of view. At the same time, the practice of participant observation also assumes the importance of maintaining enough intellectual distance to ensure the researchers are capable to undertake a critical analysis of the events in which they're participating in. So it's great to be involved with and participate and observe in things, but you have not to become totally overwhelmed with their point of view and things. It's good to have a little bit of mental distance so you can critically think about the aspects of what you're interested in researching. This means you should be willing and able to take occasionally a step back from the relationships you form with the people you encounter in the field, enough to identify and reflect upon some of the taken for granted rules and aspects of their life, rather not to become too absorbed in them and assume that they're just natural. Good participant observation thus requires a kind of self-conscious balance between intimacy with and distance from the individuals we're seeking to better understand. That is what makes us weird. This balance between being a researcher and also becoming intimately involved in people's lives. You're neither fully there, you're neither not. Now, in kind of classical texts, they used to call this going native. Oh, Jimmy's gone native. He's dressed up like the Indians. Very, very problematic, and we look at that now. But it did hit onto something aspect there. It is this idea of when you become too involved in the people's lives, which can have good consequences for helping other people out. You may not have the critical edge academically to think about the social situation. Now, there's criticisms of that. What if you're studying political activism? Obviously, if you want to become involved in that, it's good to be politically active and be engaging with that. But even when you're a political critical activist or involved in an organization, it's good to have a critical edge, to be critical of the people you're studying, the other activists, because you may find something that might help them in the future to be able to critically engage with their work. For example, there's a great book, I don't know if it's connected to this week's reading or next when we talk about classics, by David Graeber. We'll discuss it more, what's the name of the book, Avi? The one about protests. Can't remember the name of the book. It's in the-
Direct Action, Ethnography of Direct Action.
Thank you. Direct Action. It's a great book about being involved and becoming, maybe in some respects, native, involved in the actual political protests of, what was it? It was the...
In that one, there's many different ones. There's Occupy, there's
Occupy, yeah.
the Alter globalization stuff before that in Seattle.
So, for example, if you were, say, interested in
You wrote a lot of that retrospectively.
Extinction Rebellion and you're interested in their activities, you would become involved in their organization. You would do these things. Or you're interested in other political organizations. You would do these things. But you need that little bit to be able to step away for a moment and think critically of the people you love and you trust and you're involved with intimately in their lives. You need to be able to critically think about their actions or what the social consequences if they're in, to be able to even help them also further down the line. So it's an important part to have that distance from doing participant observation.
I would just add as well, that happens every time. Like I was just in Cyprus for 5 months and I was thinking, I'm going to change my entire project based on getting well immersed into what was going on. And came back to Finland 2 weeks, I'm like, all right, okay, this is what I'm actually doing. And just being in a different place, give yourself some time to breathe. Because, you know, it's like anything, you get absorbed into it, right?
This is also when you do this kind of long-term field work, it's good to have, even during your long-term field work, step out of your field site and take a break, have a holiday, have time off. And you also may come back refreshed and actually have questions loaded again. Because when you're there all the time, it becomes sometimes the mundane is no longer interesting. What people do day to day, it just becomes, you don't observe it anymore. You don't see it as interesting or different anymore. It's just becomes so part of the background. So I'm going to quickly summarize an aspect that I really like from one of the readings that summarizes participant observation. Now, a lot of previous texts seem to clump participant observation into a general method of ethnography. But DeWalt 2011 write really eloquently, I think I quite like. Participant observation, a way to collect data in a naturalist setting by ethnographers who observe or take part in the common and uncommon activities of people being studied. So basically the mundane and the exceptional. Participant observation includes the use of information gained from participating and observing for explicit recording and analysis. That is, all humans are participants and observers in all of their everyday interactions, but few individuals actually engage in the systematic use of this information for social scientific purposes. So like I said at the beginning, we're all ethnographers. You can all do this. You all learned how to get to this classroom today. You all learned that process. You all learned how to ride a bus, maybe some ride a bike, whatever. But this is through participating, activating, getting involved, doing things. You learn day-to-day life. We all do this as humans. So it's suddenly you have to do this in a social scientific way of observing the world around you. The method of participant observation requires a particular approach to recording observations in field notes. However, participant observation underlines much of the other techniques used in ethnographic fieldwork. It is a way of approaching a fieldwork experience and gaining understanding of the most fundamental processes of social life. It provides context for sampling, open-ended interviews, construction of interview guides and questionnaires, other more structured, more quantitative methods of data collection. It is rarely, if ever, the only technique used by a researcher conducting ethnographic research. Like I mentioned earlier, participant observation allows you to find out what's important to people. It allows you to get involved in their lives, and then it helps you develop other methods. You know when to use an interview. You know when to do a survey, say if you're working with a large group of people. It's a tool you use in your methodological toolkit. It's on your belt. You apply it. Usually at the beginning, it's a great way to get access, meeting people, and then you ask, can I do an interview with you? And they'll be more than happy, usually, because you've spent time with them. You hung out with them. You did these other approaches that we've discussed. Might skip over that as we kind of chunked into a lot of the time. However, as I mentioned, participant observation isn't just one moment. Participant observation isn't the only tool in the arsenal. You have all these other approaches, but it's not a perfect method. You'll never be able to capture some data on some issues. You have things. For example, if you were, for some reason, interested in the use of sex toys among Saudi Arabian women, you are not going to do participant observation on that subject. No way on God's earth are you ever going to do participant observation on that topic. So you may look at purchasing orders instead. Data collection, quantitative, would be the only approach you could ever get access to that. Unless maybe you are a Saudi Arabian woman who has sex toys. You can write an autoethnography if you want. So it's not a perfect method, but it's a very good method to help supplement other methods as well. So I unfortunately, as we're kind of cutting into time, going to have to quickly run over and jump into the next topic, which is writing. So writing is the... Where the hell did I bloody throw that? Here we go. Writing. During participant observation, you write field notes. How you write them may seem kind of boring, may mundane, but they're actually very important. You can draw sketches. You can write little notes. I'm really recommending leaving one page blank. For example, here you see my own, I can't actually hand these out for ethical reasons, there's highly sensitive information, and I don't think anyone can see this here, but you can see quickly, here's some of my field diaries, and I've written here a quick note to remind myself of something. Always leave a page blank. Super helpful, great advice given to me. Find ways of recording things best to you, little quick notes that you can write down. You could be sitting with someone, and if they're comfortable with it, you can have it on your knee and you quickly write a little recording, something they said, a little quote from them. Otherwise, you could be hanging out with someone a whole day and you're on your way home, you stop off in a park, you sit down, you record your notes. You try and remember everything you observed and noticed that day. Otherwise, then afterwards, you may go to your computer, type up as much as you can, try and remember it in a neat format. A field note diary is a great quick way of putting information down and recording it when out and about for the day. And then that evening or that weekend, you try and record it on a computer and keep it safe and neatly recorded. As much as possible, as fresh as possible, and as soon as possible. Writing is representative. You are representing events you've observed, persons, people's, it's a written account, very important. And we're preserving an account of other people's lives. For example, the folk poetry in Ukraine. It's an important thing. You're recording something from that time and period. It's a very important aspect of what participant observation. You're recording this beautiful detail. But at the same time, it's very selective. You, and we've discussed this, your positionality, what you observe in the day-to-day, what you've seen that day, is going to be different from someone else to the next person. And that's very important to be reflective of when we do write and record notes. You're very selective in what you choose, ultimately, even if you're trying to capture as much as possible of the context you're in. Now, I really just threw this picture in because I really like it. It's a lovely description, small drawing of someone done in their field notes of like the skirts and aspects. Obviously, this individual was very interested in particular cultural dress and stuff they found captured their eyes. And this might have been mundane to the people they lived, whoever did this field work with, but to the researcher was very interesting in their field notes. So don't be afraid to draw things in your field notes. It's your field note diary. If you find a way that's best to recording it, do it your way. It's yours. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Time, I'll skip over that. Right, let's get into something a bit more fun. Applying and applications of participant observation. So you may leave academia, university, or you may continue in it. Participant observation has many uses outside of academia and within academia for research. For example, in my own experience, the humanitarian world and migration management often recruited social scientists, many agencies such as the Danish Refugee Council, the Jesuit Refugee Service. I had a friend from my fieldwork who was doing work over the World Food Programme, and he was doing research for them. And participant observation was one of the methods he used. So here we can see some of the applications of this. In conflict situations, participant observation has been used as well. For example, Victoria Sanford's work helped the Truth Commission after the Mayan genocide in Guatemala, where gangs of paramilitaries went out and basically ethnically genocided Mayan ethnic groups in the highlands of Guatemala. And she was a part of a project which found culturally appropriate ways to exhume the dead that were accepted by the local culture, and for finding out remains and bringing it back to the family, and finding ritual practices that they found appropriate for the burial then again afterwards. But there's a dark side of participant observation outside, say, forensic anthropology to more what has been termed human terrain systems. So during the US invasion of Afghanistan, the US military hired social scientists, anthropologists, sociologists who had interests or some sort of done work with Afghanistan in some sense. These were hired to find out information with locals, blah, 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 and it was painted under this nice system of human terrain systems, trying to build trust with the local communities that were occupying the military force. However, ultimately, many of these people in this project broke the golden rule of ethics, that is, to do no harm, because ultimately that information, whatever they gathered, may have contributed to the killing of other people. So, even though there is approaches out there of applying participant observation, we have to be ethically aware of its application in certain industries, for example, the military. Another one is health. And for example, there's been great work by the anthropologist Paul Farmer, who's looked at the structural, he's also a medical professional, a doctor, and he's also done work, I think in Haiti, and I'm not too sure what our field sites, Rwanda. He's looked at the kind of structural global health inequalities brought about, for example, let's use an example of the coronavirus, how the medical production of the vaccine was not open to global patenting. It wasn't allowed for everyone to use it. It was still sold by corporations who wanted to make money. Therefore, the access to a vaccine that was a global emergency was not open to everyone. He looks at these structural inequalities and why we have global health pandemics today is a consequence from a lack of access to health globally. So that's a really good example. I have you down as an example from last year, Avi, talking about mosquito-borne diseases in Cyprus. Do you have any comments on applying health, participant observation in research on health?
Right, thanks for that. I'm in the process of working on that, but I don't think application needs to only be thought of in instrumental terms, which it means it doesn't need to be thought of necessarily in like practical medical terms, for example. So I work a lot with film and music and other art forms, because one can apply one's research through. So the project I work on is about intervening into the stories that we tell about disease. And so we made a decision in this project, me and lots of other non-anthropologists, that we want to try and shape what that narrative is, which then shapes what people imagine is possible. So that's another application of research, right? You can collaborate with other people, whether that's artists or filmmakers or whatever, and say, I want to participate in what is happening within a particular topic. And then, application can be simply the fact that you want to participate in storytelling, right? TV, music, all of this is all forms of storytelling, and they will shape what you think is possible and what you imagine is real.
That's a great segue into the next section. which is approaches to using ethnography in, you could say, different industries such as corporate ethnography, which usually involves working for a business or multinational organization that helps them understand their clients and their own working structure or working relationship. This is something I've no relationship with whatsoever, and corporate anthropologists, yeah, I'm not going into it. While this does have applications, for example, a lot of big corporations use big data to try and analyze this big data. An ethnographer or someone who does participant observation in the workforce finds out maybe the issues within the workforce. What are the main complaints people are saying that they won't put down in a form? So it's a way of that. They use this approach, following the mundane, going to exceptional events. Oh, I was at the corporate party and they only served pizza again, or they didn't give us a bonus or wage. The corporate ethnographer would hear this and find this information out and be able to report this to higher ups that the workforce is disgruntled. And they would never say this face to face with their manager, for example. So it's a way of applying this in the kind of corporate setting.
Just to quickly mention, do we have time?
Yeah.
Two things is one, quite a lot of our peers from Kent, I found out, went into user interface design because like the classic story is not actually true, but that doesn't matter. The classic story about corporate anthropology is that I forget her name now, you can probably Google her. I just read her book as well. The reason you have a big green button on photocopiers is that the first people that designed photocopiers were I don't know who they were, photocopier designers, but they created millions of buttons, millions of different options that you could do, and no one knew how to could actually function the photocopier because it was designed by people from the perspective of an engineer. So her job was, she worked for, I can't remember which company it was how can we sell more photocopiers? How can we she's like, well, just put a big green button on it, and then that will help you. The first step to people to get over the fear that they have. It's a bit more complicated, the story, but that was how we were taught it. And then I looked up and it was a bit more complicated, but I can't remember. So there is that kind of research. Then I had another one about a vodka company, which was just to go and hang out with cool hipsters in different cities in the US and work out why they were drinking certain things and the associations that people make with certain drinks that they have, and why people were drinking more at home and not in bars, and then how you could angle your advertising for a particular drink to appeal to that emerging demographic. So that kind of research. Yeah.
So you can take this approach that you study here, participant observation, ethnographic methods, and sell it to your next employer. I know how to do this. I know how to apply this approach to find out what is needed if you want to take it outside academia. The next one is another approach, online or digital ethnography. So when we talk about participant observation, there's various layers of participant observation, like we mentioned before. You could be a total observer, and you could still be under the title of participant observation. You would go to, say, you're online, you're reading forums. That is a way of participant observation. You are engaging differently, you can't actively, physically be there. You're reading someone's diary. That's an observation in some sense. What the hell is going on outside? Then you could have the total polar opposite, which is living with a group of people over an extended period. So online ethnography is a kind of weird one because it's kind of an observation. It's not fully there, but you're online in different forms. One of my favorites, so online ethnography can be conducted on digital spaces such as online forums, WhatsApp groups, video games. And one of my favorite texts is My Life as a Night Elf Priest by Bonnie Nardi. And it's basically this researcher who found out about World of Warcraft, made a character, and ran around doing online ethnography as a night elf and talking to people, participating in their lives online, finding out all these other things.
Sorry, can I just point out, the fact that they picked night elf, why did they do that?
Positionality, maybe. So everyone has a choice. So if you ever do online ethnography, there's many aspects and there's many approaches. For example, in my own experience, when the pandemic started, after I left my fieldwork in a refugee camp, the pandemic began. But I was able to, through friends, observe videos of what was going on, follow social media posts. Now, I wasn't intentionally doing participant observation, but in a way I was observing, and I recorded this, and I ended up putting this in an article that is hopefully bloody coming out. But that is an aspect of online ethnography and finding out this information, and it can be supplemented or used in alongside traditional more approaches to participant observation. Another one, a quick note, is there's ethnomusicology that has been involved in music events, recording traditional poetry, or even playing music alongside other musicians and engaging in that. I don't know personally a lot about ethnomusicology. Queen's University Belfast has a great program on it. If you're more interested, check out their website. Then there's other approaches such as decolonial methods. For example, this could be in situations of migratory context, that's having your research participants do research as well and contribute to actually being involved in the publication process as well. And I won't go into that too much here. You can look up more of that yourselves. Another one that is quite recently I'm becoming more and more interested in is multimodal methods. Now, multimodal participant observation or ethnographic methods works across multiple media types and involves multiple participants and involves them in the research process, much like the kind of decolonial approach as well. It encompasses ethnographic research and knowledge production across traditional and new media types. For example, in decolonial, it's often trying to deconstruct the kind of hierarchies that are inherent to academia. I'm a researcher, I go to a place, I capture that information, I leave again. Decolonial is trying to break that down. However, multimodal is kind of symbiosis. There is always going to be a hierarchy, but it's trying to bring it down by involving the research participants, but also still doing traditional aspects of research. Multimodal ways presenting ethnographic research and knowledge to a wider audience as well. It goes beyond, say, just publishing articles. It's a kind of democratic way of disseminating information. So, a great example is Helsinki University anthropology students have created a a podcast with the Finnish Roma community. And the Finnish Roma community come up with topics they're interested in, and the anthropology students ask them questions, and a kind of a back and forth. So it's academically interesting, and it's also approachable for the Roma community. It's a source of storytelling they can access anywhere, anytime, in a kind of media format preferable to people. A podcast you can listen to while you're driving or out and about. Not something in an old snooty article or book. You know what I mean? It's more approachable for people. Moreover, multimodal approach is open-ended. There is no final publication of a multimodal approach. It involves your research participants so they can design and make the research and continue it on in a different way. It fosters this kind of collaborative approach that is about equal sharing of creating this kind of knowledge together. Like, for example, you could have a social media platform. You could have an Instagram account with your research participants, and you talk about the topics that are interested in them in that format. You could have all these different things, and it's never meant to be this kind of finished piece. It's always being co-created over a long period of time. And lastly, I will touch on film. Oh, it's just decided to play. Here we go. I didn't intend for this to play, but let's have it on the background if I could get the mouse to work. Oh no. Here we go. So this is a kind of classic.
Miles off the north coast of
I
Australia.
can't even do it full screen.
Territory of Papua New Guinea.
Let's try and
In the
do
western
that.
highlands of Papua New Guinea, there are many tribes.
So this is a kind of classic ethnographic film. There's, you know, participant observation isn't just stuck to one media type or ethnography. I passed out those books earlier. Those are ethnographies created. Ethnographic film is an ethnography, but you use participant observation with your informants while doing film projects. So you spend time with them, hang out with them, build trust, and say, I want to make a film. Would you be interested in that? And you could create that. Anka's Big Maka Can Wait. It's a great film. It's on YouTube if you ever want to watch it. It's about Anka, a big man in Papua New Guinea who's trying to create a feast for the neighbouring tribe. And he's waiting years and months to gather enough pigs, enough yam, things brought from the city, gold, other objects to give to the next tribe. Because when he gives that, he's going to get so much status. It has to be bigger than the last gift the previous tribe gave. It's a great wee ethnographic film about that very little topic. And then we have a more contemporary piece by a common friend of Avi and ours, Joe Spencer. And Avi was involved in the producer of the film. So do you want to say a few words from the covey, Avi?
About to begin a PhD.
We could just watch this.
No, mate. It's a lecture, you have to talk.
I'll then just watch the 3-minute trailer and then I'll say something.
So basically, this is Joe Spencer's PhD project. There he is there, yapping away. He came to Helsinki last year. Unfortunately, he's not coming this year to show this very film. And it's about his time with Martin, who was at the time rough sleeping in Canterbury, Kent. And it kind of follows his story, his alternative approaches to education. And Joe himself, Avi, he kind of went
Yeah, so
up and made it
there's
too.
a question about earlier that was raised about what does it mean? An ethical question about, what did you call it, like creating some distance. So people have different opinions on this, so I'm not saying my opinion is the right one. But my opinion is that often, especially when I was a student with these Joe who made this and Stefan, there's a slight fetishization with the idea that you need to become as close to your informants, or what is more present day called interlocutors, but is a very complicated word to say. You need to almost be them to understand what their life is like. And you get this also in certain ideas about multi-species ethnography, like what does it mean to be a goat? In my opinion, that's not the purpose of what you're doing. The purpose is you're studying a social or ecological situation. You're not studying the individual. None of us here can ever really know who the other person is, right? I barely even know who I am. So you can't be the other person. However, there is a particular idea, and you see it a lot in like early stage addiction research. It's like, should I be taking the same substances that my informants are taking? Or like when I studied hunting, do I need to be going out and doing hunting in order to understand what it means to hunt? And the answer to me is no, you don't. You can do. But that's just one aspect of a social situation, and we worry about do no harm to informants, but there's also do no harm. There's also an issue about how much you harm yourself. So that should be kept in mind. But also, no, I shouldn't say that. Also, it does reveal interesting things. Anyway, this is just an interesting film of an anthropologist and two of his informants going on a wild, crazy journey. And unexpected things happen. I think the last point here is like how do you decide to make a commitment to certain people in your research? So you made a commitment with Lam, right? You have a friendship, but there's also a research commitment. Because if you make a commitment, what if someone dies? Or what if someone needs to like stay on your sofa? Or these type of questions. So those are the type of questions it's all messy. Those are the type of decisions you're gonna have to make. And I don't think it's like you should all be not done or you should totally lose yourself. You know, these are things that you just need to step by step negotiate for yourself. I don't know that there's one golden rule for any of that. But that's what that film is about. But in terms of ethnography, it introduces a subject matter to people they're not very familiar with, which is these people who are so-called homeless are just on their own complicated journeys, and actually the city starts to become almost animistic and alive, and you start to see something that's quite familiar become quite strange. But anyway, I'm just rambling on there.
Thanks, Avi. I think we can now kind of slowly come to an end, and just remember, participant observation is about exploring the mundane, but also the exciting. You have to observe your positionality, but retain a kind of distance from your informants. Create that rapport that's important. Remember who you are and reflect on what you're doing. But always remember, get out there, be with people, observe people. There's no right, wrong way of explicitly doing it. There's no full immersion has problems, but total just simply observing has also its issues. But they're totally acceptable in their own right, but you have to be reflective on their consequences for the research and what you're gathering. That pretty much sums it up. Does anyone have any questions about participant observation or anything touched on the lecture? Yeah.
Yes, talking about the participant observation in Africa, in my experience, when I spent some time in Africa, most of my work was in quantitative research. But something which I continue to observe was when a non-African person ends up in a very remote African village or town, they usually tend to be the news in the town, and then people would try because it's let's say an exotic creature visiting their town, and then everyone needs to see that, and that basically disturbs the whole naturalistic setting which you mentioned, right? That you would want to strive to see more naturalistic settings, more naturalistic observations. But the very fact that you look very different from the community that you want to observe would create a lot of dynamics. If you experience those dynamics where a white person in the camp where almost everyone is an African, and you being an exotic creature, at least that's how I often felt, and so I usually tried to stay away from the field and instead work with my African staff when I was there. That always tended to be much more efficient and try to keep things more calm. So how did you manage that?
This is universal for all contexts, for anyone who does field work. That's why I mentioned you're weird. You will stick out of place. However, over time, and this is why we do long-term fieldwork and we spend time, hypothetical village you go to and everyone's like, who's the weirdo in the village? Oh my God, there's a weirdo. You stick out so weird at the beginning. Give it a month or 2, 3 months, suddenly you're living with a family or you're spending time with them. You just become a kind of part of the brickwork. You just start to fit in. No one's going, the kids aren't squeezing your skin anymore, going, weirdo, they've done it all. And suddenly you're just a part of the daily life because you may appropriate certain things, but you may record notes. Even you doing interviews no longer is strange anymore. Over time, people become used to you. This is a universal thing. You go, an African flying to a Finnish village would get the same experience. Everyone would be talking about who's this person coming into the village, who's this person asking questions. This is universal, but at the same time, you will become just part of the background noise as well. And that's the important point of doing long-term fieldwork and getting people used to you and building trust and having a rapport with them. Does that help?
Definitely, yeah. Great idea.
Is there any more questions?
What are we doing tomorrow?
Oh yes, tomorrow, thank you. Tomorrow we're meeting here. And there'll be more information tomorrow. I'll give you a quick rundown. We are going to be going out into the city and practicing participant observation. We won't be all going together at once, but we'll be all in the same rough area, and I can move between you all, and you can do individually or move around with friends and chat, and you're going to try out a bit of participant observation. More